In the spring of 1943, high above occupied Europe, German fighter pilots cruised through thin, frozen air with a confidence built over years of victory. For nearly 4 years, the Luftwaffe had shaped the battlefield from above. They had shattered Poland, crushed France, and pushed deep into the Soviet Union. Even over Britain, where they had failed to achieve victory, they had proven deadly and disciplined. The sky had belonged to them. Then, far below, something unfamiliar appeared. At first, it barely registered, a formation climbing slowly, heavy and deliberate. As the distance closed, German pilots began to see its shape more clearly, large, thick-bodied, unmistakably different from the sleek fighters they knew so well. Inside their cockpits, they laughed. This was not how a fighter was supposed to look. It was too big, too slow, too clumsy. Some compared it to a flying barrel. Others called it a milk bottle with wings. To seasoned Luftwaffe veterans, it looked like a mistake, a machine born from factories and committees, not from the hard lessons of air combat. What they were seeing, they believed, would be easy prey. But what those pilots encountered that day was not a failure of design. It was the opening chapter of a transformation that would help decide the fate of the war in the air. Within 2 years, the aircraft they mocked would become one of the most feared machines of the Second World War. Its engine note alone would trigger fear and urgency on the ground. Its guns would erase aircraft in moments, and its presence would contribute to the slow, irreversible destruction of the Luftwaffe as a fighting force. This is the story of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, an aircraft that rewrote the rules of air combat, not through elegance or agility, but through power, endurance, and overwhelming purpose. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, it entered a conflict already defined by brutal experience. European powers had spent years refining their doctrines, testing aircraft designs in combat, and learning, often painfully, what worked and what did not. The German approach to air combat emphasized precision and efficiency. Fighters were light, agile, and optimized for short-range engagements. Pilots were trained intensively and expected to master complex maneuvers. Victory, in the German view, came from skill, discipline, and tactical superiority. American planners faced a different reality. The war they were preparing to fight would not be short, it would not be local, it would span oceans, continents, and altitudes never before contested at such scale. American bombers would be required to fly deep into enemy territory, far beyond the reach of friendly bases. Escort fighters would need endurance, reliability, and the ability to survive damage far from home. This fundamental difference in strategic outlook shaped everything that followed. The Republic Aviation Corporation was tasked with designing a fighter capable of operating at high altitude, escorting bombers, and surviving intense combat. Its result was unlike anything Europe had produced. The P-47 Thunderbolt was massive by fighter standards. Fully loaded, it weighed over 8 tons. Its fuselage was broad and muscular. Its wings were thick and strong. Its propeller alone measured over 12 feet in diameter. To European eyes, it looked excessive. But every inch of the Thunderbolt served a purpose. At the heart of the aircraft was the Pratt Whitney R-2800 double WASP engine, an 18-cylinder radial capable of producing more than 2,000 horsepower. This engine was already proving itself in other aircraft, but in the P-47, it was pushed to its limits. What truly set the Thunderbolt apart, however, was not just the engine itself, but how it was used. Behind the cockpit, connected by long ducts and complex plumbing, sat a turbo supercharger. Instead of relying only on mechanical compression, the P-47 used exhaust gases to force additional air into the engine at altitude. This allowed it to maintain full power where other fighters began to struggle. Above 25,000 feet, where the air grew thin and unforgiving, the Thunderbolt came into its own. German fighters, optimized for medium altitudes, often found themselves losing power and responsiveness. The P-47 did not. Survivability was another core principle of its design. Armor plating surrounded the cockpit. Bullet-resistant glass protected the pilot's head and torso. Fuel tanks were self-sealing, reducing the risk of fire. Control systems were reinforced. Redundancy was built into critical components. And then there was the firepower. 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns were mounted in the wings, 4 on each side. Together, they delivered a volume of fire unmatched by any fighter the Luftwaffe had encountered. With thousands of rounds on board, the Thunderbolt could fire longer and harder than its opponents. On paper, it was formidable. In the skies over Europe, it would take time to prove itself. When the P-47 first entered combat in 1943, its pilots faced a harsh learning curve. Many were inexperienced in European air combat. Their instincts, shaped by training and earlier doctrines, pushed them toward turning engagements, the very fights the Thunderbolt was least suited for. Against lighter, more agile German fighters flown by veterans, this proved costly. Losses mounted. Aircraft were shot down. Pilots were killed or captured. Critics began to question whether the Thunderbolt had been a mistake. Some argued it was simply too heavy, too slow, too American in its thinking. Even among Allied pilots, morale was tested. They joked about its size. They complained about its handling at low altitude. They cursed its sluggish climb when fully loaded. But amid the frustration and losses, something strange began to emerge. Thunderbolts that should not have survived were coming back. Pilots returned with stories of aircraft hit repeatedly, yet still controllable, engines damaged, yet still running, wings shredded, yet still attached. Ground crews stared at returning aircraft in disbelief. The Thunderbolts, it seemed, refused to die. This resilience was not accidental. The radial engine, lacking a vulnerable liquid cooling system, could absorb damage that would cripple inline engines. Armor protected the pilot from direct hits. The aircraft's structure was immensely strong, designed to withstand stresses that lighter fighters could not. Pilots who might have been lost in other aircraft survived in the Thunderbolt. Slowly, a shift began to occur, not in the aircraft, but in how it was used. Experienced pilots started to abandon traditional dogfighting tactics. They climbed higher. They used altitude as protection. They learned patience. And then they learned to dive. The Thunderbolt's weight, once seen as a flaw, became its greatest weapon. In a dive, gravity turned mass into speed with terrifying efficiency. The P-47 could accelerate faster than any German fighter dared to follow. This gave birth to a new style of combat. Dive from above, strike once with overwhelming firepower, climb away using speed and altitude. This was not a duel, it was an execution. German pilots attempting to pursue often found their aircraft pushed beyond safe limits. Controls stiffened, wings failed, structural limits were exceeded. The Thunderbolt escaped untouched, climbing back into the sky like a predator returning to altitude. As this tactic spread, the Thunderbolt's reputation began to change. The laughter stopped. German combat reports began to note the aircraft's strengths. Pilots warned one another about high-speed attacks from above. Encounters with P-47s were no longer dismissed as easy victories. Then there were the guns. 8 heavy machine guns firing simultaneously created a density of fire unlike anything most pilots had faced. unlike cannon-armed fighters that relied on short, precise bursts, the Thunderbolt delivered sustained streams of fire. At convergence range, the effect was devastating. Aircraft did not simply catch fire or lose control, they came apart. Wings failed, control surfaces vanished. Pilots had no time to react. Survivors described the experience in blunt terms. They spoke of sudden noise, violent impacts, and immediate destruction. The Thunderbolt did not fight delicately, it overwhelmed. But the P-47's contribution to the war went far beyond air-to-air combat. As Allied strategy evolved, so too did the role of the Thunderbolt. Long-range escort duties increasingly fell to other fighters, but the Thunderbolt found a new mission. One, it was uniquely suited for ground attack. The same qualities that made the Thunderbolt survivable in the air made it devastating against targets on the ground. Its armor protected pilots from small arms fire. Its engine shrugged off damage. Its firepower could destroy vehicles, trains, and infrastructure with ease. Bombs and rockets were added. Strafing runs became routine. Thunderbolts roamed the battlefield, attacking supply lines, transportation networks, and troop movements. German forces quickly learned that movement by daylight was dangerous. During the Normandy invasion, the impact was profound. On D-Day and in the weeks that followed, hundreds of Thunderbolts filled the skies. They struck roads, railways, and columns of vehicles. They isolated the battlefield, cutting off reinforcements and supplies. For soldiers on the ground, the sound of a Thunderbolt approaching triggered immediate fear. It was deep, mechanical, unmistakable. It meant destruction from above. While the Thunderbolt fought at the front, another battle was unfolding far from the battlefield: industry. The United States possessed an industrial capacity unmatched by any other nation in the war. Factories operated day and night. Supply chains spanned continents. Production lines were optimized for scale and speed. The P-47 was designed with this reality in mind. It could be built in large numbers. It could be maintained in the field. It could be repaired and returned to service quickly. At peak production, Thunderbolts rolled off assembly lines at an astonishing rate. Losses were replaced faster than Germany could respond. Pilot training followed a similar pattern. American pilots arrived in combat with extensive flight hours and structured training. By contrast, Germany faced severe fuel shortages and bombing damage. Training programs were shortened. Instructors were pulled back into combat. Late-war Luftwaffe pilots often entered battle with minimal experience. Against this imbalance, even the best aircraft and tactics could not prevail. By 1944, the Luftwaffe was under relentless pressure. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft, airfields were cratered, veteran pilots were lost and not replaced. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not the only aircraft contributing to this collapse, but it was a crucial part of a system designed to dominate the air. It escorted bombers, it destroyed enemy fighters, it crushed ground targets, and it survived. By the final months of the war, organized German air resistance had largely collapsed. The sky, once fiercely contested, belonged overwhelmingly to the Allies. The P-47 Thunderbolt had entered the war as a subject of ridicule. It ended the war as a symbol of overwhelming force. The Thunderbolt did not win admiration through beauty or elegance. It did not embody the romantic image of the nimble fighter ace. It was loud, heavy, and unapologetically industrial. But it saved lives. It brought pilots home. It broke enemy formations. It turned factories into weapons. In the history of air combat, few aircraft represent their nation's approach to war so completely. The P-47 Thunderbolt was designed not to impress, it was designed to endure. And in the end, endurance won. The thunder did not whisper, it roared, until there was no one left to challenge it.